You're listening to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old-time and bluegrass music. If it sounds familiar, but you can't quite place where you heard it first, maybe it was from that old classic Nickel Creek album that came out in the 90s. And it's a popular tune it jams still today, played throughout America and even abroad. And the tune has a pretty fascinating history as well. And like some of my previous videos on some other old-time tunes, well, this one goes way, way, way back. So stick around, because I'll share with you guys some earlier versions of this tune and some older versions from overseas where it came from. And finally, I'll share with you the oldest version I could find that was the inspiration for Cuckoo's Nest. And it sounds, well, practically ancient, and it's pretty cool. And I'll even discuss a theory about the name, which, unless you're an aficionado in 19th century English slang, is surprisingly not about a bird. So let's dive in. You're listening to a version of the Cuckoo's Nest performed by this man, Ed Haley. And we actually have two different versions of the song by him, one in the key of D and one in A modal, which you're listening to now. And they're both great, and I'll share both back to back. Same tune, but completely different feels. And Mr. Haley himself has an interesting story as well. Now, new information keeps popping up about Ed Haley, and a lot of the stuff we thought was true keeps getting rewritten by some newly discovered info, but this is what I was able to gather. James Edward Haley was born in 1883 in Harts Creek in Logan County, West Virginia. When he was just 3 years old, Ed contracted measles, and because of the illness, lost his eyesight. Now I know blind fiddlers just keep making an appearance on this channel. Well, local tradition blames his father for his blindness. His father, Milt, reportedly dipped Ed headfirst into ice-cold water when he was crying from the fever, which intensified the damage. Either way, whether it's true or not, when he was still a young boy, his father was killed by a mob for the killing of a couple which he was accused of. Now, because Haley's father was also killed with another man during this incident, one man named Green McCoy, it led to the rumor that Haley's parents were killed in the infamous Hatfield-McCoy feud. It was the going story for a while, but seems not to be true. When he was only 6 years old, his mother died of illness, and he was subsequently raised by his grandparents and uncle. He received no formal schooling, and on occasion, food was reportedly so scarce that his dinner at times would consist of nothing but a bunch of wild onions washed in a nearby stream. Now, since he was blind, Ed turned his full attention to the fiddle, which was given to him by his uncle, and he showed great skill with the instrument and eventually became good enough to travel throughout the area with other local musicians, performing at house dances and county fairs. Later in life, he entered a handful of fiddling contests, but he disliked the showiness of public competitions. Instead, he preferred traveling from place to place with his wife Martha, Ella, who was also blind, and she played mandolin and accordion. Or sometimes he would play with one or two of his children, trading his music for food and lodging. It was said that the arrival of the Haley family in a remote mountain community was a major occasion. Nearly every night, someone would host a dance, and Ed had remarkable stamina, often playing straight through the night without breaks between sets. If someone paid him $1 to hear a favorite tune, he might stretch it out for 10 minutes or more. Before the Great Depression, he could earn as much as $20 in a day, allowing the family to raise 6 children, send them to school, and keep a secure household. Now, Haley passed in 1951, and for many years it seemed that his music survived only through memory and imitation by other fiddlers, since he never released any albums. Only some personal recordings he made in his dining room for friends and family. And the going story for a long time was that Haley never wanted any of his recordings released, and a lot of theories popped up as to why. Well, at least that was the story for a while. Until quite recently, that is, until a researcher dug up an old newspaper advertisement from 1930. The ad is a public solicitation by Ed himself to send him 35 cents if they wanted one of his, homemade albums. Now, over time, some of those homemade recordings began to pop up here and there. And it would be this man who stumbled upon some of these homemade 78s dating back to the 40s. And that would be the biggest reason we listen to Ed Haley today. I'll quote John Hartford on this one. He says, quote, "When I first discovered Ed Haley, it pinned my ears back." He said, "It was like the first time I discovered Earl Scruggs." Well, after listening to those recordings, Hartford spent his final years researching and promoting Haley to a wider audience. He even began writing a book about Haley, which remained unfinished at Hartford's death. And in a final Hartford quote, I'll leave you with this one. He said, quote, "Haley's sound is impossible to describe because it starts conjuring up pictures right away, and the pictures get in the way of description. It goes to a whole other level, almost like you see places, feel temperatures, smells, all kinds of stuff." And well, I'll second that as well. Like I mentioned previously, this tune is pretty old, and it can be traced to, the British Isles. The Cuckoo's Nest derives from Ireland and Scotland, and if you were like me, you probably thought, of course, the song sounds totally Scottish or Irish. Here's a recording of an Irish version of the Cuckoo's Nest. Give it a listen. As you can hear, the melody is almost identical to the American version and hasn't really been changed that much at all. Now, while in America the tune is primarily a fiddle dance number, in Ireland and Scotland it was also performed as a sung ballad, even though the dance versions were very popular as well. Now, the earliest recording I could dig up of this song as a ballad is one found in Scotland from 1959. And the story goes that a prominent music collector at the time, by the name of Hamish Henderson, was on the hunt to collect and record the oldest folk songs he could find before, they just died off and disappeared in the modern age. He was basically like the Alan Lomax of Scotland. And as he was searching around Aberdeen, he ran into a man who said, "If you want to find the real old ballads, you have to meet a woman by the name of Jeannie Robertson." And eventually he tracked down the lady's house and knocked on the door, but Robertson didn't want to let him in. Well, Hamish insisted. He said he was a great music historian who just wanted to listen to some of her songs. Well, Robertson said, "If you are such a great historian, then sing Child Ballad number 163. For those of you who don't know what number 163 is, it's called the Battle of Harlaw. Well, fortunately for Mr. Henderson, he actually pulled it off, and he was let in, and a musical partnership began. Today, Jeannie Robertson stands as a monumental figure in Scottish traditional song, whose influence and importance as a preserver of folklore has spread throughout the world. Born in 1908, Regina Christina Robertson came from a traveler family in Aberdeen. Her father Donald, who died when she was only 1, was a piper, and her mother Maria was a singer, with a vast knowledge of the old songs and stories that went back for generations. And Jeannie began to learn these songs during the First World War. Her stepfather and 3 brothers had all been called up to fight, and poor Jeannie's mother found it hard to sleep at night. So the family would all sing into the early hours to take their minds off the war. And this is how she began collecting her vast knowledge of these old songs. So here's Robertson performing her version of the Cuckoo's Nest. See if you can still make out the same basic melody, even though the lyrics are a bit bawdy if you can cut through the accent. Well, the song is still hauntingly beautiful.
I called it just a cuckoo's nest. There is a thorn bush in our kellyard, There is a thorn bush in our kellyard. At the back of thorn bush there stands a lad and lass, but they're busy, busy herring at the cuckoo's nest. It's hey the cook and ho the cook and hey the cuckoo's nest. It's hey the cook and ho the cook and hey the cuckoo's nest. I'll give anybody a shell and a bottle of the best that will ramble up the feathers of the cuckoo's nest.
I don't know about you, but when I first heard this version of Cuckoo's Nest with words, it kind of changed the whole context of the American fiddle version. It's hard to put into words, but it's kind of like if you grew up only watching black and white TV, and then all of a sudden you get a new TV with full color. Now, there are a lot of old lyrics to this tune, and a lot of different versions, and most of them are pretty raunchy. Which brings us to the name of the tune. In case you haven't figured it out by now from the previous song, well, the cuckoo's nest was a term at the time that commonly referred to, well, female reproductive anatomy. Apologies if I spoil this innocent sounding tune for you folks. Like I said, the song is pretty old, and we have some documentation to prove it. The cuckoo's nest appears in numerous 18th and 19th century dance collections from Ireland, Scotland, and England. And I even found it turning up in an old book by the South English poet John Clare in the early 1800s, whose body of work was inspired by the English countryside. He was the son of a farmer and a singer of local reputation, and he became a fiddler and a collector of songs and tunes of southern England. He recalled that his father was very fond of the old ballads. His father would boast of it over his horn of ale with his friends, that he could sing or recite above 100 ballads, even though he was illiterate. Here's a verse that I found that Clare wrote down, and it's one of the oldest I could find. Now, as I was digging up these old manuscripts of Cuckoo's Nest, I noticed this footnote in Preston Baird's chapter on the song, which led me to this old manuscript entitled Ancient Music of Ireland by one Edward Bunting. Now, there were a couple of reprints of this document, so I first pulled up the oldest one and searched for Cuckoo's Nest, and I found this footnote. Well, that was a dead end. But then I stumbled on a revised copy that had this footnote, which pointed to the song in James Aird's selection of Scotch, English, Irish, and Foreign Airs, Volume 1, which was printed way back in 1782. And this is the earliest printed reference we have of the song. But here's the clincher. The song doesn't appear under the Cuckoo's Nest. It's under another title, Come Ashore, Jolly Tar, with Your Trousers On. Now, this tune has survived to this day as well, and there are numerous versions, but it's a fairly common dance tune found throughout England, Scotland, and Ireland, and I've even come across some cool dances to it as well. But most historians agree this tune, Jolly Tar, goes way, way back into the fog of unrecorded history, possibly to the Renaissance or earlier, and we'll get to the recording. But first I have to quickly discuss the name, because, well, it does sound a bit strange. Who is Jolly Tar, and why are they urging him to come ashore with his trousers on? And there are a couple of theories. Well, the term tar is a reference to the tar that was used by sailors to waterproof their ropes, sails, and even their clothing to protect against the harsh conditions at sea. Sailors became so associated with the smell and look of tar that it became, well, part of their identity. Over time, tar became a term for sailors as a whole. But what about the phrase, with your trousers on? Now, there are two theories on this one. At the end of the 18th century, when most men wore knee breeches, sailors, apart from the officers, wore trousers, and had been doing so for some 50 years. Reason being, a sailor could easily roll up his wide trousers when decks had to be scrubbed, or when seas were breaking over them. So maybe, with your trousers on, is just a description of a sailor wearing pants, which were more uncommon at the time. The second theory is more in line with the more bawdy theme to Cuckoo's Nest. Some historians believe the term is a reference to when sailors were released to port after a long voyage, and yes, sailors were known to pay visits to the local brothels at port. And over time, many captains refused shore leave when in port to prevent desertions, and instead ferried out boatloads of companions for shipboard recreation. So the theory is that this was a joke made about sailors to not forget their pants before coming ashore. Okay, so I found this version of Come Ashore Johnny Tar, which many believe to be as old as the 16th century and possibly earlier. It has that really cool Renaissance feel to it. And I'll play a cut and see if you can make out the melody of Cuckoo's Nest without getting chills, like I did. So I'll leave you with that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and once again, folks, thanks for listening.